Support for Donnybrook is provided in part by Design Air Heating and Cooling.
Seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. That's like any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Well, parts of the region are still trying to get better after the May 16th tornado, and we're going to talk about that among many other topics on this edition of Donnybrook. So thank you very much for joining us. Let's meet the panel, starting with Sarah Fenske from the 314 podcast and St. Louis Magazine, and of course her morning newsletter. She's sitting in for the vacationing Wendy Weiss. One of our founders is with us, Bill McClellan from the Post-Dispatch. Hey, hello to Joe Holleman from STLtoday.com and the Post-Dispatch, and Alvin Reid from your St. Louis American. Alvin, we're going to start with you because, well, Cara Spencer, the mayor of St. Louis, said that she's going to stake her reputation on making sure that tornado victims stay in the city of St. Louis. I mean, we talked last week about St. Louis losing more population than any other of the major American cities in recent years. But that was before the tornado struck. We understand that about 2,500 homes have some serious repairs to be made. 1,100 currently are red tagged, which means uninhabitable. Do you think it's possible that the mayor will be able to stem the population decline after this tornado?
Okay, there's a resurgence of sort already going on in St. Louis. The Urban League has had a big, massive distribution. Last Saturday, they're going to do one this Saturday and the 2 Saturdays following that. All the organizations have come together. I know I'm leaving out countless churches and small places. Everybody's trying to help right now. I think that would lend itself to maybe keeping this going and saying, like, all right, rather than stop now, how do we improve this entire area? However, I think the math doesn't add up. If you don't have any place to live, the red tag, and so many people don't have insurance or buildings aren't insured, I think there's just going to be a loss of population. I just think that if you don't have any place to go, you've got to go elsewhere. And I think, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to be able to keep the people in St. Louis. The key is, how do you bring people back to St. Louis?
I think we want to keep people in St. Louis, and I respect that this is something the mayor says she's going to be taking so seriously. I mean, staking your reputation on something. She's saying words that could later be used against her in a TV ad if she doesn't do this, and I appreciate that. I think it's going to be hard, but we have had some big multifamily projects that have come online in the last year, and one would hope that, sort of the trickle-down effect of those opening up, people move into that creates other openings. We're going to have to work hard to make sure that we have affordable housing options. But it's not like St. Louis is one of the world's tightest housing markets where there's just not houses for rent. There should be some options.
Right, and I don't think she has to keep 100% of the people who are suddenly homeless in town. But, if she just has a long list of several hundred people, she ought to be able to have somebody on staff kind of, we can help this family, and come close to 100%.
And I took it more as almost, I guess, a rallying cry, more than I took it as
maybe that's what
we're going to have a 100%.
Right.
I was glad to hear her say that, and it showed a dedication to, we don't want people leaving the city. Let's all stay, let's pitch together. There's so many other factors. So let's say you do save everybody in North St. Louis whose home was damaged by a tornado. How many others will leave because of what they think is a crime problem, or schools? So this idea of saying, here's how many people we had today, 4 years from now she has to have one more than that. Well, I just appreciate her trying to.
The schools is really could be the bigger point, because the school officials have said that they have too many schools. They're going to close a boatload of them because right now there's so many schools, they don't have the personnel to be counselors, teachers, coaches, bus drivers. And when they close schools, that's going to mean kids are going to have fewer education options. Not that the options are the best in the region to begin with.
All right, well, I think, Charlie, people have been leaving the city because of the schools for decades.
Yeah. Me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Friends of mine who my wife and I would be friends with, as soon as their kid hit kindergarten age, moved to the county, loved the city.
Yeah.
And they would move right across the border into a Maplewood or a Shrewsbury because they didn't want to send them to city schools. So the idea that schools could be having a detrimental effect on city population, that's not new news at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's not really the argument or the point as far as, all right, these people don't have, what are you going to do with people whose house is wrecked? Right now, they really aren't thinking about schools if you don't have any place to live. Also, today, I took a route down Martin Luther King back down to Vanderveer, and as I'm driving that way, you're not that far, like from, Midtown and all that area. And boy, there's a lot of just abandoned buildings that the tornado had nothing to do with. Mm-hmm. And I'm I was kind of thinking, like, you know what? Why, if you fix this up, you're close to downtown, but it's worth doing something with this. I know we got to help the people on the north side.
People have been. There has been a lot of energy going into Jeff Vanderloo. I assume that's the neighborhood you're talking about there. There has been a groundswell of things happening in that neighborhood, and it can sometimes be hard to miss it when you're driving by. But when you walk by, it's kind of like house by house. You can start to see some of that energy changing. I do think you're identifying a real problem with the schools here because they have kicked this can down the road a few times. They know that they need to close some schools in North City because there has been such a population loss.
It's coming,
and
too.
this is going to exacerbate
Yes.
that. And when you have that neighborhood school, it can serve as an anchor to a community.
Oh, hey,
so it's going to be.
Ask the folks at St. Rock. I mean, I was talking about the public schools, but the Catholic schools are in danger of closing too.
It's going to be a big problem. Attention is going to have to be paid to this.
I happen to agree. Now, Joe, I thought you had a very fascinating story last Friday morning, page A3, on why the city's emergency management agency workers were not in the office on May 16th in that afternoon, even though a tornado had been forecast by Channel 5 and other outlets expected to occur between 1 and 7 p.m. Turns out they were in a workshop run by a group called Air Collaborative, which tries to get people to work together to increase the creative economy. The head is Beth Flowers. On her own LinkedIn page, she's a self-described squirrel whisperer. I don't think that these people should have been in any workshop like that at all.
I was curious when you remember when the news first came down that weekend, it was that the CEMA folks were not in the room. None of the CEMA folks were in the room where the alarm actually was, and they were relaying it by phone, and they found out they were at a workshop. So I thought, well, there's two kinds of workshops. There's a workshop that teaches you how to deal with tornadoes and sirens, and then there's ones that teach you how to collaborate. Let's get a little feedback, think outside the box, and we've all been to those kind of corporate workshops. And you go, you exchange some ideas, you do some diagrams, you play some games, and then if you're lucky, they have a big sandwich and some sheet cake, and it's on a Friday, you get to bail out about 2 o'clock, and boom, there's your day. And indeed, that was the kind of workshop it was. When I went on the website, when I found out the company, I looked at it, and other than saying that emergency service places were contracting with them, I couldn't see anything in what they described, what they did, helped with the acute, immediate handling an emergency situation. But all 4 people from the office were out of the office. And I just think I don't think there's a good explanation for that. And we can defend any workshop you want and say, well, it might be good and, sandwich and sheet cake.
No, I don't think that's defensible.
I think somebody has to be in the office.
And that's the only problem I have with the whole thing. Look, if they were called at a bonding session and they were at Topgolf, but somebody was at work, if they had been at Dave & Buster's, I don't really care as long as it was like, okay, as a team, we're going to do this event. As long as somebody is back there, especially when they said a powerful storm was headed toward St. Louis.
I don't mind people handling the big picture as long as the small picture's not kicking everybody's rear end.
For emergency, the office, you figure there's not a lot of urgency to that on a day-to-day basis. I mean, but on the days where the Weather Bureau is saying a storm is coming, you think that they would go, well, this is not the day for us to be.
Just to play devil's advocate here, there have been so many days where they keep saying there's a big storm coming. And obviously this was the one to take seriously. But that day I remember thinking, okay, they're calling again for rain. I'm not even gonna think too hard about this because they keep doing this. And then, the sirens will go off or you'll get the alert on your phone. I'm not gonna go to my basement. I keep going to my basement and regretting that I've wasted 15 minutes
but
going
you're
to my
not running
basement.
the emergency.
But you're not running the emergency management agency. There's a huge difference there.
How many of us throw ice melt when they say it's going to snow? I don't feel like, boy, I wasted that ice melt because it didn't snow.
I'd feel like that.
That's what I'm saying. Once again, and if it's your job to tell me a tornado's roaring through town.
There's the job part.
Joe, I disagree with you. I was in corporate America for 34 years, and I never attended one of these feely-good sessions. And if there is a Dave & Buster's, you do it after hours. You don't pay people to attend nonsense workshops.
Actually, that goes on all the time, Charlie.
It shouldn't.
And let me tell you what.
It shouldn't.
If you didn't do one the whole time at KMOX, they just didn't tell you about it.
They didn't invite me. Well, that's possible. Okay, I'm going to go to you, Bill. The governor, Mike Kehoe, who's a native of St. Louis, is holding a special session. He wants to do a couple of things. One, if you have insurance and you were struck by the tornado, he wants to give you a $5,000 tax credit against the deductible. Megan Green, the president of the Board of Aldermen, complains, hey, what about the uninsured? But he does have $25 million, not only to loosen the regulations for people who are seeking housing, but also to provide money for people who need transitional housing. He also wants money for the Chiefs and the Royals and their new stadium. So where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but where it should go is there should be immediate help for the people who have suffered storm damage, and there should be no help for the Kansas City Chiefs or the Kansas City Royals.
Boom, there we go.
I opposed giving money to the Blues and the Cardinals, let alone shoveling money to the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals. That's crazy.
Yes, what he said. And I've said it before, I don't believe that billionaire owners of sports teams deserve tax credits for them to get help on their private business. So just to look at what kind of money we were talking about, the Hunt family, which owns the Chiefs, estimated roughly worth about $25 billion. The owner itself, Clark Hunt, somewhere between $1.6 billion to $2 billion. John Sherman, the person who is the main owner of the Kansas City Royals, $1.2 billion. Anytime you have legislation that's going out of its way to help people who qualify as billionaires, you've sponsored some wrong legislation.
Well, I can understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I don't know if anything in Missouri has put the state on the map like the Chiefs recently with Mahomes and Kelsey and Taylor Swift and all that. But also, what they're asking is from the Royals and the Chiefs, let's say they both give $10 million a year currently in taxes. Instead of that money going to Jeff City, now it'll go to a new stadium. If they move out to Kansas, they'll lose that $10 million a year in revenues anyway. So
I think there'd be a certain pride in the state. There should be, if we just said no. And if they want to move across the river and Kansas wants to give them money, that's up to the people.
Okay, I think every state should say that, Bill. I agree with you. I think every state should say no.
In theory, that'd be nice.
You're talking about they're raising Missouri's profile. Half of my friends that are like, oh, Kansas City Chiefs, that's in Kansas, right? Like, people already think they're in Kansas. I think Kehoe is going to run into some real headwinds here. You have a lot of conservatives who are saying, we are not going to give you this unless you also do like some very big tax breaks, which I don't think Kehoe's in favor of. He doesn't want to blow a hole in the budget. The Democrats are very mad about what happened at the end of last session. They're vowing not to play ball. I think he's going to have some trouble. We could lose both of these teams.
So we'll go from a state that had 2 NFL teams. And by the way, everyone knows the NFL is the biggest entertainment product of the year. Out of the top 100 shows watched on television every year, 100 are NFL games, okay? So we'll be completely out of that. We'll be the hinterlands, literally, figuratively.
I had a kid who, I'm not a kid anymore, I guess, but the kid who went to school out there, I like that part of the world. I really do. I don't want to see the teams move over to the Kansas side. I want them to stay in Kansas City. This number that's being tossed out there, to me, is not exorbitant. So I'm willing to kind of work with it. However, these two things should not be discussed at the same time. I think it's kind of disgusting that you're going to be debating giving the money to the Royals and the Chiefs at the same time. People ain't got no place to live in St. Louis.
Right.
Let's take care of that problem first and push that.
Well, especially,
stadium
we give them millions of dollars, and then Patrick Mahomes breaks his leg, and suddenly the Kansas City Chiefs aren't the Kansas City Chiefs anymore. Right.
Don't you think, though, that St. Louis lost a lot of stature
Yes,
when the Rams
yes, it
moved out?
did. Yes, we did, and that's kind of proven out. Also, the whining has not stopped either. You know, like so let's not just say like, oh, just let them go. Nobody will care. Well, stop all that whining about them being gone.
Sarah, let me ask you about something closer to home. Gravois Road. We know the TrailNet came out with a report a couple weeks ago that the pedestrian and bicycle deaths, unfortunately, are on the increase in the region. Some of the most dangerous roads are Grand, Natural Bridge, and Gravois. And we've had 2 recent deaths on that stretch of highway recently. One was a pedestrian, another was a bicyclist. So some in the bicycling community are saying, hey, we need to redesign this street to make it safer. That's the good news. The bad news is MoDOT will not get around to it until at least 2030.
Yeah, MoDOT seems somewhat impervious to the kind of public pressure that is always making St. Louis city officials move quickly from sort of one crisis to the next. MoDOT is like, we have this 5-year plan. We're going to get to this when we get to this. And if you want us to pay for this, you have to wait 5 years. To me, I think this is a real missed opportunity here. You know, this is a route that they're in charge of. It is very dangerous. People in St. Louis don't know how to handle the angles that come when you have a diagonal shooting right through the grid. It would be great to see them put in some changes sooner. I think you could see lives lost if they don't.
I just don't know where to assess blame on Gravois and other streets riding a bike. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know. I don't ride bikes on busy streets. I just don't.
Well, maybe you're doing it for recreation. Some people have to do it to get to work.
All right, that's a good point. I guess
That's the problem.
And we want to get to the city that people ride bikes in. I mean, it's a livability or whatever they call it.
It's very important. Yes.
This was a workshop, Joe. What we're talking
We
about.
could have a workshop. We could have a collaboration workshop on this. My immediate solution to it is I never ride my bike on Gravois or Chippewa. I even hate the fact that to get to one trail, I have to ride about 3/4 of a mile on Hampton. And I hate every second of that because I know those roads are not designed for a bike. And what I do is I've figured out a number of side streets that will get me to where I'm going without having to go on those big streets. I mean, that's an immediate solution if it can be solved, but you're not going to change the path of Gravois.
But what you can do is you can do engineering changes. You can add these bump outs that everybody in Chesterfield hates so much that MoDOT is now ripping out. The city is crying out for bump outs because they help slow down drivers. It's just too wide. You can put a median in there that visually slows cars down. There are things that we know how to do.
And you can do that, and I will still not ride my bike on Gravois, Grand, or Natural Bridge.
Why, Sarah, don't we have more police patrolling that area and handing out tickets and turning reckless drivers into ATM machines?
I think the police would say that there's not enough of them to go around. They're busy responding to things like murders. You know, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of discussion about why don't the police do this or that, and they say they're doing it. And people don't seem to see them doing it.
I think there's so many people are driving recklessly now. It's just different. And I think that there's nothing really the police can do. There's just this madman driver thing going on all around St. Louis County, every place. And we all see it. And like, man, people didn't used to behave
Well, when you had
like this.
2,200 cops and now you have 850 or whatever the numbers are.
I think if you had 2,200, I think people would still be hit by cars because people are driving cars like maniacs right now.
Well,
They really do.
I will say, I think Sarah's onto something. I think progressive cities encourage biking and they make biking safe on major roads with a dedicated, segregated lane. And I'm kind of disappointed with MoDOT that can't do anything until the year 2030. Although MoDOT's under new leadership, Ed Hassinger is the new head, and I think he's a great guy. So maybe he'll move us in a new direction, Joe.
I get you that, but then what project gets canceled so that one gets moved up?
Something in rural Missouri.
There you go. There you go. And all folks in rural Missouri.
Who's paying the majority of the gasoline tax?
There you go.
Good thing we don't go out to rural Missouri.
Sarah, I want to ask you about Dardenne Prairie, small community, 14,000 people in the western end of St. Charles. A small, somewhat, but it was even smaller about 10 years ago. It only had 7,000 people. So the population has doubled, and so they want a moratorium on multifamily housing at the very time when we need more housing in the region because the rents are sky high and so are the prices of new homes.
Sure, and we do need more multifamily housing in the region. I would hate to see too many people copy this, but I also know it can be very hard when you're hit with this giant influx of new residents, when you see something like your population double. I started my career as a very young journalist at a suburb that was going through one of these situations. It's tough. The schools are taxed, the services are taxed, the revenue has not yet caught up with all the things you have to do for all the new people that are living there. I am fine with a one-year moratorium. There's plenty of other vacant land in St. Louis that people can build new multifamily housing projects in.
Agreed. I think if the municipality decides they want to do something like that, now my first thought was, why not make it 2? And then say, like, all right, after 2 years, we're back in business again, but we're going to control what happens right now.
I mean, I find it unusual that there's a criticism of a city that said, wait a minute, let's take an organized, thoughtful approach to our development. Isn't that what we're usually asking places to do? As opposed to just rounding people up.
I know of a home that is now renting for $4,500 a month and another one for $3,500, and the rents are high. We all know that. What this country needs is more housing, not just in the St. Louis region, but especially on the coasts. And, you know, Ness Sandoval, this is kind of interesting, I think. He said that 95% of the people moving to St. Charles are over 60. So they don't really have kids. St. Charles needs more kids, but they're not moving out there.
Yeah, they're over 60 and they don't have kids, but you know, they got money. So I can't blame them if they're going to move out there and buy a house.
So in other words, the last person to move to a suburb wants to be just that, the last person to move to the suburb.
Well,
I got in.
Now,
now let's clock the door.
That's the way of the world, Charlie.
That's it.
Can't they move to the suburb next door? That's maybe not quite so popular right now.
Cottleville has problems, like St. Louis has problems.
Yeah.
And
I know they did. Right. Lake St. Louis exploded. I get that. But, I mean, if Dardenne Village said, because I can still build a house in Dardenne Village, right? I can buy a house.
You can't do an apartment.
Multi-apartment. I don't have a problem
I think
with
the solution is go to the Clayton City Council. You're a esteemed resident, and tell them that city needs to build more moderate to low-income, multiple-unit housing.
It's actually true, and you know, in Massachusetts and suburban Boston, it's required. It's required.
You could have put them in Brown Shoe Company, that building.
There you go.
I'm not opposed to that. Alvin, I want to ask you about a group of white supremacists who marched on Saturday in Kansas City from the World War I Museum to, I think, downtown. The group is called the Popular Front, I think. And
Patriot Front.
Patriot
Front. Maybe not popular, but maybe not even patriots. But apparently they didn't break any rules or laws except one. They traveled by hiding in U-Hauls, rented U-Hauls. So U-Haul's upset and they banned the people who had the contracts. But other than that, they walked on sidewalks, which is their right. They spoke, which is their right. Are you satisfied with the reaction of Kansas City?
I thought that they were just a little too cordial in the reaction to it. Maybe the biggest problem I had is these people were all masked. So, you know, I see this mask and they're marching, I just see hoods and Klansmen. But, you know, like the statements from the city, the first thing they said was, everybody's got their First Amendment rights, which I agree with. But I think you got to be a little bit more condemnation of this, because this is dangerous. And I don't want St. Louis, to be the place where it's like, oh boy, we're welcome in St. Louis. So how about we say, like, look, do what you have to do, but you're not welcome here. And I just wish Kansas City would have been a little bit more strenuous.
I didn't sense that they were welcomed in Kansas City at all. I think that the city officials looked at that if they're not breaking any laws, that the First Amendment covers their right to get together and march down the sidewalk. And the tough part about freedom of speech is that, I mean, it takes no courage to stand up for the First Amendment when it involves speech you agree with. It's speech you don't agree with is where it actually comes down to. And freedom of speech means, unfortunately, sadly, this group was condemned by the ADL and sounds like a truly unlikable group of people. But they get protected so that everybody else gets protected, and that's kind of the
You
standard.
know, the ACLU has usually been good about that. I remember even when I was a kid, the Klan, I believe it was,
Skokie,
marched in Skokie.
Yeah.
And the ACLU said, hey, you know, we obviously dislike these people a lot, but, you know, as long as they operate within the law.
Look, we had this debate at KU, and I would say, look, you got to let these, you know, people do their thing. I guess they didn't march, but something they did on campus. Okay. Things are a little bit different right now, and maybe I feel a bit more threatened. And I understand exactly what you're saying. These people, I'm not, because I think there's suspension of rights in the United States going on now that's terrible, so I can't necessarily point them out. But I think these people are dangerous, and you got to make a point that these people are dangerous.
Alvin, those will be the last words for this segment. Of course, we have Last Call on the YouTube channel coming up. But first, let's take a look at the letters about last week's program. I read reporting that some people in the city did hear a siren, and I personally know of one person in Dutchtown who heard a siren. There must be more to the story than no one pushed a button. That from Mary Leopold of St. Louis. I understand the people hit by the tornado are in great need of help, but I think replacing the antiquated emergency alert system and other infrastructure upgrades is the type of thing the Rams money should be used for. Love the show. That from Tom Nagel of St. Louis. We also heard from this.
Concerning a comment that Joe Holleman made on last week's Donnybrook when he said St. Louis was built around the automobile. That is false. St. Louis was built around the street railway. I urge that Mr. Holleman look up a Channel 9 special, Ride of a Lifetime, the story of the St. Louis streetcars, which was presented on 9 PBS in 1993 and is available on YouTube. And he will learn that basically the street railway system was ripped out to make way for the automobile.
Thank you, Bill. Take that, Joe Holleman. Hey, by the way, you can write us care of 9 PBS 3655 Olive Street, 63108. Don't forget those emails, donnybrook@9pbs.org. On social media, use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. And like Bill, you can call that 9 line at 314-512-9094. If you're out of town this summer, make sure you listen to us on your favorite podcast source. And coming up next on the 9 PBS YouTube channel, we tackle more topics. The conversation continues. We'll be talking about possibly spending $155 million to fix up the downtown convention center. And maybe we'll take a look at those gas prices in Illinois, which are going up again. That and more. We'll see you again on YouTube and next week at this time.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.